All right, thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz, welcome to the program. The movie in question is Beneath Sheep's Clothing, and my guest to talk about it is author Trevor Laudon. Trevor is a New Zealand author, speaker, political activist, blogger. He was vice president of ACT New Zealand, a classical liberal and right libertarian political party from 2006 to 2008, the author of 5 self-published books on U.S. politics. Trevor, thanks for joining me today. It's an honor.
Always good to be on. Thanks, Charles, for having me.
You know, Trevor, before we get started, I have to ask you about this New Zealand story with this haka, which took
Yeah,
place
right.
in the parliament. I mean, it's something that, in spite of myself, I can't stop watching it. It's fascinating. And what is going on there briefly? What's happening with that?
Well, we've got to see the head of the ACT party, which you mentioned. I used to be the vice president of, is
Yes.
David Seymour, and I knew him very well when he was the head of Young ACT when I was the vice president, and he's introduced a bill defining the rights conferred to all citizens under the Treaty of Waitangi. That was signed in 1840. It's like your Declaration of Independence. It was a founding document of New Zealand. And what it was the Maori citizens, a native race, transferred sovereignty over New Zealand to the British Crown in exchange for British citizenship. Okay,
Mhm.
they became citizens. Now, the left, the communists, ever since then, have been trying to say, no, this was a partnership. Maori are equal partners to everybody else. Maori should have 50% of representation in government. Maori should have 50% of this, 50% of that, 50% control of the airwaves, the seabed, etc. So David Seymour's Act law was to basically codify the rights so that Maori and everybody have exactly the same rights as everybody else. Nobody has special rights, which I 100% concur with. That's the principles that America is founded on. But the
Yeah.
left spins this as though this is a horrible bill taking away the rights of people. No, it's not. It's stopping communists. The Maori Party is a communist party, effectively. Is
Mhm.
stopping communists getting leverage over all of New Zealand society, way out of proportion to their numbers. So that's what it is. It's a complete scam. And David Seymour was calling out the scam and saying every New Zealander should have exactly the same rights, no more, no less, regardless of your ethnic origin, which I think you and probably all of your listeners would agree with, Charles.
Of course, and the bill doesn't take any rights away from the Maori. It just simply recognizes that all citizens of New Zealand are equal and that the Maori
Yeah.
are free to organize their identity any way they choose. Doesn't
Yep.
change anything. It just it doesn't give special group rights to any particular group.
It just stops Marxists using race as a wedge issue to get more power for themselves. Like, for instance, they were pushing things, and it happened in some places that Maori, who are 15% of the population, would get 50% representation on government boards.
Mm.
So this is a great way to blackmail people. Oh, we're on the Waikato Water Board. Well, if you want to build a new pipe, you'll just have to give a couple of $100,000 to our Maori Resource Centre,
I
and
see.
then so it's ending an endless stream of scams, of special privilege, of affirmative action. But the left wing media, of course, says, oh, this is taking away rights from people. It's like saying if you arrest the mafia, you're taking away their rights.
Do
Because,
the Maori have a particular geographic part of New Zealand, or are they well distributed throughout the country?
they're well distributed. Well, look, the further north you go, the more Maori it gets. Like
Right.
New Zealand is about 1,000 miles long, 2 main islands. When I grew up in the South Island, Maori were probably 2% of the population. if in the far north are probably more like 40% of the population.
I see.
The further north you go, the more Maori citizens you find, but they are everywhere. Every community has Maori
Right.
citizens.
And the other thing, I mean, this gets into a broader question of the indigenous issue, which is something the left is, I think, using on an international scale as a
Absolutely.
leverage
Yeah.
to try to undermine sovereignty and to use people. And just to go to that briefly, my understanding is that historically, the Maori people and the British arrived in New Zealand roughly around the same time. It
No,
wasn't like they were there first, and if they were there first, it wasn't. It wasn't. We're not talking about a long period.
no. The Maori arrived about 1,000 years ago from the
Okay.
Polynesian islands, so they were well established by the time the British came. The British established formal sovereignty in 1840, but there'd been British communities there for about 60 years before that. A lot of Massachusetts whalers were there, by the way.
Oh,
There's
sure.
a lot of Massachusetts blood in certain communities in the northern,
Interesting. Yeah.
because the sailors had to have something to do in their time off, and so there's a lot of Massachusetts ancestry in certain
Yes.
parts of the North Island.
Just like a lot of Massachusetts people are in Hawaii. They
Well,
settled here.
Exactly, because of the whaling industry and that's
Whaling industry and also missionaries.
yeah,
Puritan
exactly.
missionaries.
Well, that's exactly the same pattern in New Zealand, and the Maori are basically the same Polynesian race as the Hawaiians.
Understood.
They're the southern reach of the Polynesian diaspora, which went to Hawaii, Tahiti, and many islands in the South Pacific. But look, you're right about this being used internationally. The communists call this the nationalities question. It was devised by Stalin. It's where you don't have a working class, you find ethnic minorities, religious minorities, racial minorities that you can instill a sense of grievance in and use them as revolutionary cannon fodder. So this is the Hawaiian independence movement. It's a Marxist movement. The La Raza movement, which wants to return the southern states, southwestern states to Mexico.
Sure.
The communists who worked in the black community in America and the Native American community for decades. So this is a common thing. Wherever there's minorities, there's Marxists stirring them up.
Right, and they want to sow division, and they run on this assumption that somehow if a timeline indicates that a group of people were there before another group, they have some kind of a divine right to that country. And of course, they apply this very arbitrarily because they will never apply it to Jews.
To Israel, that's different. That's different.
Yeah, to their homeland of that tiny little swath of land that we call Israel. I want to bring things to politics right now, and I feel remiss if I don't talk about the fact that after the resounding victory, thank God, of President Donald J. Trump to serve a second term, he received both the electoral vote and the popular vote. It's interesting that all those states that were trying to get rid of the electoral college by signing a pact saying that all of their electors will go to whoever wins the popular vote, they're now going to have to send all their electors to support Trump.
Yeah, isn't that a sweet injustice? Isn't that sweet justice?
Yes, and also that Republicans have taken both houses of Congress, and it does look like we're moving toward a significant realignment politically, one that is as profound as any going back to the Reconstruction after the Civil War.
Yep.
But they are causing a lot of problems in these miserable final weeks of this lame duck, illegitimate, illuminated, radical regime. They're trying to trigger World War III in Ukraine. And I do think that that's obvious. Now you have green lights for the Ukrainians to fire advanced missiles into Russia and place landmines. And it's all happening in these final weeks. I think that they're trying to embroil the United States into a world war, which will, of course, make it difficult for President Trump to fulfill the mandate that he called for, which is to bring about a negotiated peace in that war. Do you think
Yeah.
that is the case?
Well, look, I'm a big Ukraine supporter, so I'm glad they're getting these capabilities. But yes,
Right.
look, Biden didn't. The Ukrainians have been pleading for 2 years to be able to strike back into Russia when they've got troops massed across the border ready to attack them. They're not allowed to attack them. So now Biden has given them some limited capability right at the end of his term. I think this is basically to take a card off President Trump's table.
Okay.
Basically, there's nothing to do with helping Ukraine here, though I'm glad they have the ability to defend themselves. This is all about sabotaging President Trump.
Well, that's right. And I think that both sides want a negotiated peace at this point. And I don't think it's realistic for the Ukrainians to expect Russia to return Crimea or some of those eastern provinces. So there's going to have to be.
Russia wants all of Ukraine. Russia's not going to
Well, that's
negotiate
right. That's why
anything
there has
less
to be a
than
negotiated peace.
all of Ukraine. So
Of course.
there is no negotiated peace.
Okay.
Really, in my opinion, because
All right.
Russia said quite plainly, we want all of Ukraine, not just the parts we occupy, all of it.
Right, but they're not going to get all of Ukraine because
Well,
there's
they're
a
not going to
stalemate.
negotiate till they do.
Well, that's just it. There has to be painful concessions. A war can only end with a total victory by one side or painful negotiations to result in the compromise. And I think that Trump's position is that to protect Ukrainian sovereignty, there's going to have to be, and to stop the war and the killing, there's going to have to be a painful negotiated peace. And that's sort of where I am with it. But let's go on to your movie.
It's not mine; it's Julie Bieling's movie, but I'm interviewed in it.
You're interviewed
play
in
a
it.
role in it. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the movie because it gets into a topic of how much communism and communist ideas have infiltrated our liberal Western democracies, and something right under our eyes which we don't see. It's imperceptible, but yet done in clear in the broad daylight. So
Yeah, well, look, the movie is Beneath Sheep's Clothing, and Julie Bieling did it. She was a missionary in Russia not long after the collapse of communism, and wrote a thesis on how the Russians suppressed, how the Soviet communists suppressed religion specifically, the techniques they used. And she found that when she got back to the States, she found that the Democrats were using exactly the same tactics against Christian churches and conservative Jews, Catholics, etc. here, even Mormons. And so what she's done the movie basically showing us how we're in a communist revolution. That's what we're in right now. Now, Donald Trump has put the brakes on that, and he's going to reverse a lot of it. But we got to understand that's what we're in.
right.
We're in a 70% completed communist revolution. They have our education system. They have Hollywood. They have sport. They have most of the universities. They have the Democratic Party, the unions, and they're trying to consolidate their power by winning one more time and legalizing 30 million illegal immigrants, so who will then vote Democrat religiously. So we're in a revolution. Donald Trump is putting the brakes on, but they ain't going away. They're going to be fighting tooth and nail, and I mean violently, lawfare, everything. And Julie's is the best movie I've seen out there that actually makes it real to people that that's what we're in. That we can understand that this isn't just stupid Democrats or silly liberals. Open borders, the indoctrination of kids, destruction of the energy industry, all of it is communism. All of it is a manifestation of the American communist movement, which is allied to various foreign communist movements.
Yes, I mean, well, more philosophically, I think that Whittaker Chambers got it right in his book Witness when he noted that communism is the world's second oldest religion, and that it goes by different names at every generation, but what it is essentially rule by man, as opposed to the sovereignty of a creator of the universe, with man under God having a limited sovereignty. and that every generation has had to grapple with this idea. It really, in the modern times, was launched with the French Revolution. In the
Yeah.
United States, it was launched, I think, or got the successful foothold with the election of Wilson in 1912,
Yeah.
and the transfer of sovereign powers to unelected bureaucracies like the Federal Reserve and the Council on Foreign Relations and all these other groups that are shadowy and unelected and don't represent the people. President Trump has thrown a stick into the hornet's nest by basically openly calling for a return of sovereignty to the people under God and not to this clique of internationalists who want perpetual war and the erosion of sovereign borders. And for that reason, while he won, the war goes on. It's not over. In fact, this is just the beginning. They're not going to sit down and allow for a reversal of hundreds of years of setting the stage for their creation of this international beehive of where nation states become just pro forma and provinces of a world order.
Yeah, look, and you now analyze it perfectly, Charles. This is ultimately satanic. You know, the
Indeed.
natural order of things is God, man, nature. You know, and there's hierarchies. You know, we're given institutions to govern ourselves, like the church, like civil government, like the family. They're the godly institutions. So communism in its various forms, and you're right, it's gone back thousands of years, has always sought to overthrow and undermine the church, to overthrow and undermine the family, and to overthrow and undermine civil government, to basically give Satan the upper hand on earth. That's what communism it is, and its various names. Today we call it sometimes globalism or the deep state, but it is communism, and it's heavily influenced by China, by Iran, by Cuba, by North Korea, other countries who have control over large numbers of our senators and congressmen, and have actual their agents working all over our communities. Like if you look at Boston, you know, there's a group there called the Chinese Progressive Association, which is a communist group, works with the Chinese Communist Party, and basically runs the Boston City Council and runs Elizabeth Warren and many of your other Congress members. So
And
all
Michelle
over
Wu.
America.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Massachusetts is behaving in a very strange way. I think particularly since Maura Healey and Michelle Wu were elected.
Yeah.
And you have this phenomena, I think, manifested in this spending, maxing out the state budget to pay for bringing illegal aliens in and putting them up in nice hotels, giving them 3 meals a day. There's no sense to it. There's no logic to it, and the state's
There's no
going broke over
logic
it.
unless it's part of a revolution. It
Yeah, and
doesn't
now they're
make any
covering up
sense.
a pedophile scandal with that involves these people. I'm not going to go into details about it because it's a story that's just emerging. But in normal times, this would be enough to force them all out of government, but it won't happen
Yeah.
here. They just control the levers. I mean, the Boston Globe is a huge power in this state, has been for many, many decades, and they kind of call the shots in terms of what is permissible and what isn't in the public sphere. And that's, I'm sure Massachusetts is just a microcosm for a lot of other states, not all. We have some, they call the red states, more freedom oriented, but they still control what, the high ground of the culture, as you say. I mean, I think there
Yeah.
was Andrew Breitbart once said that, politics is downstream from culture, and they control the big culture, the big media, big tech, big, entertainment, Hollywood, all of it, academia. They really have, and they have worked to develop this stranglehold on it slowly over time. It's like a Fabian approach, where they
Yeah.
gradually weed out their opposition and install their friends and agents.
That's exactly how it works. You know, how do you take over a university or a union or a church or a government? You just get a few people into key positions, you know, secretary of a union, president of a union, chancellor of a college, head of a sociology department in a college, and they just hire their friends. They
Mm.
keep hiring their friends, and they get rid of any opposition. And that's in 10 years, you could take over a university or a church or a labor union. And that's what's happened. Most of our institutions in America, the unions, churches, Hollywood to a large degree, are controlled by communist sympathizers, many of them loyal to China. And one way it exhibited, if you look at all the states that had the harshest lockdowns during COVID,
Hmm.
Massachusetts being one of them, Minnesota being another, headed by Tim Waltz, the Chinese communist
Indeed,
aficionado,
yes. Hmm.
California, Hawaii, Oregon, all of the states that had the worst lockdowns were all the states with the most Chinese influence. Because it
Right.
was designed not for public health, it was all about wrecking our economy.
Right,
Because if
and
you have
it
no
was
economy,
had
you have
nothing to do. That's a huge scandal, and they were able to shut down small, as you say, mom and pop businesses,
yeah,
and while leaving the big box stores open, shut down the churches, shut down the schools. Children had to get education through Zoom, which, by the way, actually turned out to backfire on them because we got to see what
yes,
was
I
going on.
agree. I agree. Most, yeah, exactly.
And eventually the regime had a major setback. Thank God for the Canadian truckers who
Yeah,
stood up and said, "We're not going to go for the forced vaccines of the jab, which of course is questionable." And the whole regime collapsed here in Boston. Michelle Wu, our new mayor, talk about maybe communist associations.
oh, absolutely. She is
Yeah, I mean, her first
very
act
heavily
was
tied into
to
the communist movement.
you couldn't go into a store or a restaurant unless you showed your card proving you'd had the vaccine. And that happened right when the truckers struck, and there was fear that the trucker strike would spread to the United States. So they backed down, and she backed down.
Yeah,
And so they had a setback, but they're going to try something else. I mean, it's only a matter of time. I think that they've had another setback with the election of Trump.
yeah,
And the team that he's putting together is tremendous. They're going after every one of them. They have people who they're planting a strategy, from what I understand, where they're going to sue everybody. Every movie he makes is going to be lawsuits, attempts to
yeah,
impeach him. And I think that Trump has become sophisticated enough, and the people around him, that they're going to respond by countersuing. They'll tie them up. I mean, they'll bleed them out. This is a tough group, and I just was censored on TikTok. I guess I said something that PO'd the TikTokers, so I've been suspended for a week. Sorry about that. Um, so anyway, that's the agenda. Look, I mean, it's happening in real time here. They
well,
still
it's wonder because
control.
we were talking about Chinese influence
Yes, I
in the
think that was
COVID.
the key. Mentioning Chinese influence.
Yeah,
That I think you're absolutely right, which is profound. China has, basically established a censorship regime in the United States with scores of, they got the EKG thing. I mean, they got rid of that to an extent, where if you don't rate well in three areas: economy, environment, governance, and social consciousness, you get a lower score and you can't function as well. I mean, that's open in China, but in this country, it's a little more subtle.
yeah.
But it's a gradual tightening up of control over the lives and the destinies of citizens.
Well, that's right. And what people see these things, they see the open borders, they see the ESG, they see this transgender education, they see the
Mm.
lockdowns, they see the destruction of the US energy industry, all of these things. What they don't see is that these are all arms of the communist octopus. All of these can be linked back to China. The COVID, obviously, Black Lives Matter was a Chinese operation.
Right.
The election, every state has major Chinese-backed election voter registration organizations. The Chinese Progressive Association does that for you in Chinatown. They run Boston through doing that. So if people understood the actual depth of Chinese penetration of every level of our society, from Congress and the Senate to Hollywood to the unions, whatever, they would be shocked beyond measure. But this is why they had to get rid of Trump with the COVID and the Black Lives Matter and the election shenanigans. And now they're freaking out because they've overplayed their hand, and Trump is a lot smarter this time and a lot better people around him. So we're going to see a battle royal coming up over the next few years. But as the point being, don't go to sleep. It ain't over. Too many people went to sleep the first time Trump got elected, and they came back and they won the election, and they rubbed our noses in it like little puppies in the carpet, you know?
Right.
And we got to understand, this is Trump's a leader, but we got to all be involved in taking our country back, all of us.
Yes, indeed. And we, as we said, the battle is just beginning. I mean, it's a great victory. We should bask in it and enjoy it as we enter into the festive season. But they're setting all kinds of booby traps for Trump. And I mean, even Obama did this when he set up the Steele dossier, and he put people that they call it burrowing. They burrow people into the civil service and into administrations and positions that you can't remove them. I mean, right now, in the final miserable days of this administration, Elizabeth Warren and a couple of other senators are trying to shove radical judges into place. And by the way, shame on Ted Cruz and J.D. Vance for not going into the Senate and working to stop this. They're sitting on their laurels. It's these are positions that are going to be with us for decades.
And look, their own literature, I read the left literature, they're talking about the job is to entrench, their word, entrench as many justices in the system as we can to hold up the Trump agenda. Entrench, their word. So this is a very organized, very disciplined, very focused revolutionary program that we're dealing with.
Indeed, it is a color revolution. In fact, recently, one of the congressmen, I forget his name, he openly stated that they're setting up a, quote, shadow government. They want Shifty Schiff, who basically lied for years about having proof that Putin colluded with Trump to steal the 2016 election. He's going to be set up as a shadow attorney general, and they're going to everything that whatever Trump does or any of his cabinet members, they're going to counter it. So, I mean, this is like, it's subversion at its worst. And they point to the British system as an example. Well, guess what? We kicked out that system in 1776. I mean, we don't want to go back to that.
No, we don't. We got a constitutional republic, which has set the country free and made the most prosperous and great country in the world. But he just mentioned Schiff. All the time he was going on about Russian collusion, he was working closely with the Committee of 100, Communist China's main influence operation in America. So he was going on about Russia, and nobody called him for his China. Deeply in bed with the Chinese Communist Party all through that time, and nobody called him on it. That's why I write my books exposing this kind of stuff. But Adam Schiff is hardcore, and he's connected to the Committee of 100, which, as I keep saying, is Communist China's main influence operation in America. But this is the thing, Elizabeth Warren is deeply tied into the Chinese Progressive Association, Communist China's main influence group in Massachusetts. So is Ed Markey. So are several of your congressmen. So is Michelle Wu. So are several other people on the city council. China controls Boston. China controls San Francisco, LA, Boston, I believe Portland, Oregon, certainly Honolulu, and many other cities around the country, the Twin Cities as well. And so we got to understand how deep this is, and the battle that Trump's got on his hands, and that we have to play a role in this.
What we can do is exactly what you're doing right now, Trevor, which is to identify, expose, and then oppose the nature of this conspiracy. And I use that word openly because they call it that themselves. I mean, the
Yeah,
entire communist edifice is by nature a conspiracy. They don't operate
that's
out
what
in
they
the
call
open.
themselves. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
they're
they
not
say that.
operating out in the open. I mean, they're not. They are subverting institutions because they know that if they came out in the open, they would be kicked out so quickly their heads would spin. So they do it through, careful, subversive, well-studied means of changing perceptions. People that are involved in this, some of them don't even know they're involved in it.
Yeah,
It's very, very tricky and very difficult to detect, which is why it's very important, especially now with Trump coming to power, that we get into identifying the nature of this. And by the way, your blog is called the New Zeal blog. I really
yeah.
recommend
TrevorLoudon.com on New Zealand blog. Yeah,
trevorloudon.com, New Zeal blog, shining the torch for liberty. You get into American politics. You have your book is Stealth, Kamala Harris's communist roots. That was something that I think people did become
yeah.
aware of that one.
Well,
That's
that's the book just behind me. You can see it just there. Stealth,
yes,
Kamala Harris's Communist Roots. But that is not just about Kamala. That's about the movement that made her, the communist voter registration groups, the massive communist infiltration in California and other states. So yeah, I
right.
recommend that. But beneath sheep's clothing is a must see for everybody too.
Yeah.
People
I
people
mean, the
discover
reason they
their
couldn't steal the election this time around is because the Republicans at least learned some lessons from last time, and they were able to field thousands of volunteers who worked the polling places, who sat in the counting rooms to make sure that there were more eyeballs on those absentee ballots. They couldn't do a mass mailing of absentee ballots this time around, but they couldn't pull it off. But yet they still are counting in some places. They're
well,
still trying to
this
do rear guard actions.
see, there's a group called Seed the Vote, which is run by the Chinese Progressive Association of San Francisco, which works directly with the Chinese consulate. They are running the vote curing operations around the country. That's where they send their people, and they're openly saying this is to get more seats for the Democrats.
Oh
They're
yeah,
openly saying this. So that this Chinese operation is going around finding faulty ballots and getting them cured. But they only get them cured and admitted if they're Democrat ballots. If they think they're a Republican ballot, if the person who did it is a Republican, they're not going to cure theirs.
no,
So
they
they're
get
still
tossed in the
trying to steal
garbage.
seats. They're still trying to steal state Senate seats and congressional seats around the country
They
right
are.
now. This is Chinese
There's still 3 seats they're counting in California,
operation.
and of course you have in Pennsylvania the attempt to steal the Senate seat. One
Yep.
of the electors, one of the election officials, there actually openly admitted that they were counting illegal ballots, and she said, "I don't care because everyone breaks the law anyway." So
Yeah, yeah.
even their communistic governor has come out, Shapiro, and has put a stop to it. It's just so obvious that they
Well, they
can't
should
do it.
be going back. You should be going back and throwing out all the ones that have slipped through the
Yes, they
cracks.
should. And also, we do have now groups on our side like Turning Point USA. You've got Charlie Kirk, and you've got others who are curing ballots for us. So, I mean, they've learned some lessons. They're going out and doing, voter harvesting now because that's how the system works. We all voted early this time around. We didn't wait for election day. We didn't fall into that trick. They still stole Arizona, but the stealing has been met on the field by people who are playing that same game. And I think that's been very important. Although now that President Trump has won, I hope that he doesn't forget about the fact that we need national reforms on voting. We need national voter
Look,
ID. We need to have paper ballots, get rid of the machines. Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts put a bill up in 2018. I mean, where she said that the voting machines are rigged and that we need all paper ballots. Of course, she denies that now, but
yeah,
that's what,
well,
we have to call that up and say, I support Elizabeth Warren's bill.
yeah, and I do too.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, isn't it? All these reforms have to be put in place, and people have to go to jail for committing vote fraud.
Oh, absolutely.
You
And
know,
by the way, it's not
what's
voters who are
worse, stealing
committing.
your car or stealing your ballot?
Yeah, I mean, this is a crime. It's a felony. It's not individuals committing voter fraud either. It's election fraud. It's ballot fraud.
It's organized,
Yeah.
hardcore. It's like an organized crime issue, and I want President Trump to set up an organized crime unit, federal government that goes and does RICO lawsuits against the organized ballot crime operations in Boston, in New York, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, and you start finding the low level people,
Yes.
and you say, we've got you for vote fraud. You get 2 years in jail, but you can go free if you rat on who paid you, and you go up the chain and you find the people at the top and you put them in jail. And if you do that, vote fraud will be gone. It'll be over.
I think that's an excellent program. I mean, those rotten big city machines have been in power by these means for several decades now. That goes back to the 1960s.
At least,
Oh yeah.
and we're not going to fix the country unless we fix that
Oh,
problem.
I
And
totally
people,
agree with you. That's the first priority, returning the voting system to one man, one vote. And the integrity and sacredness of that system has to be restored. So, Trevor, just briefly, let's talk a little bit about this movie again that you're here to promote. What will people expect to see with if they get this movie?
what they'll expect to see is understanding that communism is alive in America, and it's way more powerful than they think, and it'll show how it's done, the
Mhm.
ways this is manifesting, because we all see these weird things going on, whether it's open borders or transgenderism or the attacks on the energy industry, whatever it is, but we don't understand that it's cohesive, that this is part of an organized program by our enemies to bring us down. So the movie features me, James Lindsay, Alex Newman, and a whole bunch of other people some of whom who lived under Soviet communism and are
Mhm.
talking what they saw back in their own country. They see is exactly the same that was happening in our country until the last election, and still is happening, though at a now more on the defensive than it was. So, look, it's a great movie. It's very, very gripping and very educational, and I want millions of Americans to see it. I really do, and I don't make any money off it.
Mhm.
I was in it because I believed in it, and
Well,
I just want people to see it.
and now more than ever is the time to learn these these messages, these lessons, and to examine your local politics, your state politics, and when you see strange things going on, like governors saying, "I'm not going to allow illegal alien criminals to be deported," or "I support sex change operations for children," or any of these other things which are hard to explain. You know that there's something rotten underneath because these are not things that people elected our government to do or to allow.
These are not stupid people. They're saying crazy stuff, but they're not stupid people. These things only make sense if they have an agenda to weaken and divide the country in preparation for a revolution. And you got to look at it through that lens. And
Mm.
Beneath Sheep's Clothing will help you to understand that lens, how we actually look at these phenomena and see the connections between them.
I can already see the battle lines forming around the issue of deportation of illegal
Yes,
aliens.
absolutely.
And I think that the Trump administration is going to focus on, first of all, deporting the worst people. I mean, certainly in the first year, criminals, fentanyl dealers, drug dealers, violent criminals, and also I think that there's going to be a massive self deportation
Yeah.
because they're going to cut off the money. They're going to cut off the fancy hotels and the dinners and the credit cards. Even Mayor Adams in New York is already starting to do this, which is why I think he's under attack. They're
Yeah,
already
100%.
he's actually shown a little independence. And I think that's going to be the Trump strategy, but their strategy is going to be to try to resurrect all of this old demonization. Oh, he's separating families and the children in cages, and we're going to hear all that kind of propaganda.
Yeah.
How do we respond to that?
Well, I think like Leo Hohmann is, you don't apologize for it. You
Yep.
said these people are criminally in the United States. They are taking the place of legal immigrants. There is no justice for this, and for the integrity of the American system, and for a lesson to all of those around the world who want to cheat that system. These people must not be allowed to enjoy the fruits of their criminal activity. And when I say criminal activity, jumping the border is a crime.
Exactly.
It's not just everybody who is here illegally is a criminal by definition. They've
That's right.
committed
And we have to
immigration
stand up for
fraud.
law and order. Yeah. And the idea that they would be flown in by the Biden people, that shows how Biden, I think, to the degree that he had any scruples or brain left, was very compromised, probably by China. And
100%.
yeah.
He's China's man. He's been China's man since at least 2001. He was Russia's man since the early 70s, and Iranian's man since the late 70s. But but look, allowing the borders to go wide opening, having 10, 15 million people streaming across the border, that's not stupidity.
No.
That is a deliberate program to alter the United States on a permanent basis, to swamp the conservative voting base, to cripple the hospitals, cripple the education system, and economically destroy us. That only makes sense if it's malicious. These people are not that stupid.
Oh, no, it's quite deliberate.
It is absolutely deliberate. The goal is the social transformation of America on a permanent basis towards socialism. You imagine, had Kamala Harris got in and she legalized 30 million illegal immigrants who then voted 90% Democrat, that was their goal, to have a one-party state that could never be thrown out, ever.
You'll never get rid
getting it.
Once you have a communistic government in place, it's very difficult to get rid of it. I mean, look at Venezuela. We could look at the Soviet Union. It took almost 100 years to get rid of that. I mean, it's they immediately assume control of all of the levers of power, all of the nexus of influence in a country, and there's just no defeating them. So
people used to say to me when I campaigned against communism in the 80s, they'd say, "Oh, Trevor, if the people in Russia didn't like communism, they'd just organize a revolution and throw it off." And I'd say, look, to do that, you need a few people, right? So you got a room, you got 25 people in it, you're going to organize a revolution. 5 of those people are KGB informants, but you don't know who they are. And if they tell the KGB what you're doing, you're going to get executed. So are you really going to try and organize this counter-revolution?
No, they use, of course, they have the mechanism of terror. I mean, I've talked to a couple of Iranian exiles here who have told me that they go back, that some people try to go back and they all get killed. I mean, it's just they control that ability, and they have an outreach all over the world. And so, through terror, certainly China does this. China has in colleges the Confucius clubs, which keep an eye on Chinese students, making sure they're in line.
And they had about 17 secret Chinese police stations in Minneapolis and others, monitoring anybody who might say something bad about China, and then their families will get pressured. They will get kidnapped. They've actually kidnapped people from this country and taken them back to China. Chinese nationals living in America who have criticized the Chinese regime have been kidnapped and returned to China.
Oh yeah, and to
And
disappear.
that was right under Tim Walsh's nose. Tim, China-loving Walsh in Minnesota was allowing this to go on.
Yes, and it's something that, I mean, we can see how China even handles its own citizens. People disappear if they run afoul of the Communist Party. So, so Trevor, let my viewers and listeners know where they could get more information about you and your excellent work.
Yeah, trevorlaudon.com. That's my website. All my books are available there. And Beneath Sheep's Clothing, you go to beneathsheepsclothing.com or go to Amazon and look it up and get a copy there.
Trevor Laudon.